Which former Rangers could make their way back to Broadway via a trade before the deadline this year? Today, we're discussing Vladimir Tarasenko, a player that was drafted by the Rangers but didn't spend a lot of time here, and a fan favorite from just a couple seasons ago.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 996 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So obviously it's getting into trade deadline season here. We saw the first domino fall the other night with Elias Lindholm being sent from Calgary to Vancouver. Quite the king's ransom the Flames got for Lindholm there. But I thought what might be fun, we did a couple of trade-centric episodes already, and a lot of times what we do is we'll kind of just take a look at three different players. And I want to do that today, but I thought for, just to kind of change things up, kind of give this episode a theme, let's take a look at three former New York Rangers who it's at least conceivable could be traded back to Broadway between now and the trade deadline. And I want to start today's episode by talking about probably the biggest name player on this list, and that is Vladimir Tarasenko. Tarasenko, of course, spent the last half of last season with the Rangers. Obviously, didn't really go the way the Rangers wanted in the playoffs, but Tarasenko, for the most part, did well while he was here. And then the offseason rolls around. Everybody thinks he's going to sign a multi-year deal with this team or that team. He ends up remaining a free agent for quite some time, and then ends up taking what would appear to be the highest average annual value, but just for 1 year, $5 million with the Ottawa Senators. He just turned 32 years old with the Senators this year, 45 games, 13 goals, 20 assists, 33 points. He's also a plus 11. And let me just say, to kind of turn back the clock to around this time last year, I believe early February, February 9th. Yeah, that's when the Rangers struck their deal for Tarasenko last year. And when I saw this was going to happen, I'm innocently scrolling through Twitter, and Tarasenko is one of those guys. We talked about him in an episode like this last year where we're trying to ID the big trade targets for the New York Rangers. And certainly he was going to get some consideration, and the Rangers were always going to do their due diligence. But when you're actually just kind of scrolling through Twitter and you're not really expecting to see anything that crazy, but all of a sudden it pops up from one of these, big name NHL reporters that Vladimir Tarasenko is heading to the New York Rangers. You get excited about that. I know I certainly did, kind of jumped up, little fist pump and everything, the whole 9 yards. But I was excited. Like I said, it happened out of nowhere. Happened almost, I want to say, about a month before the deadline last year. So Drury kind of pounced, got Tarasenko as well as Nico Mikkola from the St. Louis Blues, like I said, on February 9th. And again, unless I'm forgetting a move last year, Tarasenko was one of the first big trades to happen last year. And like I said, it happened quite some distance between when it happened and the NHL trade deadline. But I love the move. I thought the price that the Rangers gave up was reasonable. And as far as Tarasenko coming back this year, the possibility, I do think, just like last year, he checks quite a few boxes for the New York Rangers. For starters, we've talked about this a lot. The Rangers in general could probably use a right winger. It's kind of a 50-50 as far as the bigger needs, center or right winger. I probably lean a little bit more towards center at this point, given the fact that we know that Philip Hedl is not coming back this year. But nevertheless, the Rangers could stand to improve at right wing. It was the case last year, and of course, some things never change. Rangers really have been thin at that position the last handful of seasons here, at least pre-deadline. They tend to add some people around the deadline, and that, obviously lengthens the lineup a little bit, makes them a little bit deeper at right wing. But, at this point of the season, they're always looking to add a right winger, or so it seems. The other thing that I love here, he's got a shooter's mentality. His wrist shot is so good. It's such a cliche to say things like, oh, blink and you miss it. With him, it's almost literal. If you happen to blink your eyes and Tarasenko's got the puck, you might miss his shot. And by the time your eyes open back up, the puck might literally be in the back of the net. And his shooting percentage this year, this really stood out to me. It's at 14.6%, which is obviously very good. It's also the third highest of his 11-year NHL career. So obviously Tarasenko can still rip it. He's a little bit older now, doesn't quite put up points at the same clip that he used to when he was in his absolute prime, but clearly he can still shoot the puck, and that's something that the Rangers need more of. Too many guys on the Rangers are kind of pass-first mentality and, always looking to set up their friend, and the power play has been driving me crazy in particular lately because it just feels like pass, and it never really leads to anything. We know the Rangers have good power play. It's just been a little bit of a rut lately, and that's part of the reason why. But Tarasenko, he won't hesitate to shoot the puck. He seemed to fit in well with the team last year as far as just from a culture perspective. We know him and Artemi Panarin are pretty good friends. Would the two of them end up back on the same line? It's possible, but I do see him more likely slotting it with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider on the top line. As we've mentioned, just a revolving door at that spot ever since Pavel Buchnevich was traded away. And, Tarasenko can come back and, have his second go-around in that role. I do think that's where he would most likely fit in with the Rangers. He's going to be in the top six. And if they want to stick with Lafreniere, Trocheck, and Panarin all together, I won't argue that first and foremost, but by default, that lets you know that, Tarasenko is going to be up there on the top line with Mika and with Kreider. And, as far as trading for the same player 2 years in a row at the deadline, obviously it's not something that you see very often, but as we know, there is a precedent for this. Chris Drury did the exact same thing last year, acquired Tyler Mott at the trade deadline for the second consecutive season. Last year, he brought him in from Ottawa, which coincidentally is also the team that Vladimir Tarasenko trades for. And there is some history there. These two teams striking some trades in the past. GMs have come and gone for some of those trades, but at least there's a little bit of history there for whatever that might be worth to anybody. But they got Mott from the Senators last year, got him from the Canucks the year before that. And look, Tarasenko, bigger name than Tyler Mott, has a bigger contract than Tyler Mott, but at the very least, we do know that this has happened before, and you got to believe that, Drury, if he feels like Tarasenko can help this team, he's certainly going to, look to at least open the discussions with the Ottawa Senators and see if there could be a fit there. As far as what it would cost, so might as well go back to just last year, and, they were dealing with a different team. They brought in Tarasenko from the Blues, but to look at the return that the Blues got, the Rangers gave up a conditional first-round pick, a fourth-round pick, Sammy Blais, and Hunter Skinner, and they got Tarasenko and also, once again, Nico Mikkola. The Rangers last year had 2 first-round picks, and they kept their own. St. Louis ended up getting Dallas's first-round pick, which, off the top of my head, I want to say that's the pick that the Rangers acquired when they traded Nils Lundkvist to the Dallas Stars. But regardless, the thing that gives me some pause, whether it's Tarasenko or really anybody on the trade market this year, we got to talk at least briefly here in the middle of this Tarasenko segment about the Elias Lindholm trade because, that's 2 teams in the Western Conference, and they don't directly impact the Rangers. And look, if Lindholm is going to get traded and doesn't come to the Rangers, at least he's not going to a division rival. That's first and foremost. But man, the Flames got an absolute haul for Elias Lindholm. They send him once again to Vancouver. They get Andrei Kuzmenko, a good player already, still, I believe, just 27 years old. 2 prospect defensemen. One of them is Hunter, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this last name, Brzustewicz. 69 points in 47 games in the OHL this year from a defenseman. Another defenseman by the name of Joni Jurmo. A first-round pick this year, a conditional fourth-round pick this year as well. And again, I thought all along that this would be a seller's market, and this would seem to indicate that might very well be the case. I don't know if this is going to set the entire market for the entire league or what's going to happen there, but you see a move like this, and Lindholm being one of the most coveted, if not the most coveted player that's going to be readily available at the deadline this season, and you can't help but wonder if that also means that the asking price for Vladimir Tarasenko is going to be very high. And you got to believe he's going to be traded because the Senators are going nowhere. He's on a 1-year deal, so he'll be sent somewhere. Is a team going to have to come in with a king's ransom for Vladimir Tarasenko? If the Rangers acquire Tarasenko again, will they have to pay more this year than they did last year? These are all very distinct possibilities. And I do think that with Tarasenko, you might have to give up a first-round pick. This season they gave up a conditional first-rounder last year. Would they also have to throw in, a prospect, a mid-level prospect? Are Kakko or Keandre Miller in play? Again, I don't want them to trade Kakko. Keandre Miller, his name came up in a Bleacher Report article, so maybe he's on the block as well. But I haven't really seen a whole lot else indicating that Miller would be traded other than that, one mention in that Bleacher Report article. Doesn't mean it can't possibly happen, but I don't know. I mean, tough call. I do think at the very least, you're going to probably have to start with a first-round draft pick for Vladimir Tarasenko and probably take it from there, especially when you consider that the Rangers won't be the only team interested in Vladimir Tarasenko. So we'll see how that goes. As far as any concerns, not quite as productive, like I said, as he used to be, Vladimir Tarasenko, but still producing more points per game than any right winger on the New York Rangers. So you got to figure you play him with some better players in the Rangers, and he can probably pick up his production a little bit that way. And again, he does help them in a position where they're thin right now. Injuries have occasionally been an issue for Tarasenko as well, but the good news there is he's mostly been healthy in all of the past 3 seasons, including this one. This season with the Senators, Tarasenko has played in 45 of a possible 47 games. So good news there if you're worried about the injury history. But I would really like this pickup for the Rangers. I won't mind Vladimir Tarasenko getting another shot at it. There's obviously familiarity with him being on the team from last year. Strengthens right wing, which once again is either that or center, one or the other. Probably the Rangers' biggest weakness right now. The guy can shoot, he can pass, tons of playoff experience, a cup champion as well. A lot to like as far as another reunion with Vladimir Tarasenko. But that's just one option. We'll keep everything rolling in just a second and turn our attention to a former Ranger draft pick who ended up playing in only a handful of games with the Rangers, but has gone on to have, pretty solid career for himself, has kind of bounced around the league a little bit. We'll talk about this player in just a second. First, though, definitely want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a win or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Also want to let everybody know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so we'll go ahead and keep everything rolling here. I want to, like I said, shift our attention to somebody that was drafted by the Rangers, but only played a handful of games here and was only part of the team for just a small portion of one season, and that is 28-year-old Anthony Duclair. He can play either wing. Gotta believe he'd be on the right wing for the Rangers, barring something completely unforeseen and unpredictable. But Duclair right now in the final year of a 3-year deal that pays him $3 million per season. Before this season started, he was traded from the Panthers to the Sharks. My understanding is it was due to salary cap issues that the Panthers were facing. Wasn't necessarily something that they wanted to do. And now that he's on the Sharks, Duclair basically just waiting until he gets traded again because they're going nowhere fast. They're going to be, very clearly sellers when the deadline rolls around here. I feel like this isn't the first time we've talked about Duclair coming back to the Rangers. He's one of those guys that he's always kind of in the conversation. He was a free agent not that long ago, and I think we looked at him and thought maybe it could make some sense. Of course, coming up to this year's deadline, he's going to be on the move. And even last year with the Panthers, they obviously ended up having a great run, went to the Stanley Cup final, took out the Bruins in the first round. That was awesome. But they also were struggling for a good chunk of last season and barely made the playoffs. And so there was a time last year where maybe it was looking they might even be sellers, in which case maybe Duclair could have been on the move with a year and a half left on his contract. That didn't happen. And he turned out to have a solid season and a heck of a run with the Panthers to the Stanley Cup final. But again, this year he's getting traded. It's just a matter of when and where he gets traded to. As I've been mentioning, Duclair, of course, is a former Ranger. A little bit of context here. Drafted number 80 overall by the team back in the third round of 2013 NHL draft. Only played 18 games with the Rangers, 1 goal, 6 assists. And then they traded him with John Moore and 2 draft picks in exchange for Keith Yandel and Chris Summers. I liked Yandel, and I mean, who's to say? Like, if they traded for Duclair, would the Rangers have necessarily held on to him all this time? I mean, they went through a rebuild and they traded just about everybody except for Chris Kreider. He was the only guy that, was here before the rebuild and stayed here all the way through the rebuild and is obviously still here to current day. So I don't know. Duclair might have been here for a few years and then been on his way. But looking at that trade now, I liked Yandel. I really did, and he was a good addition to that team. They needed kind of an offensive-minded defenseman. They didn't really have one at the time, so I get why they did it, but kind of feels like the Rangers maybe lost that one. But regardless, Duclair's really bounced around. He's gone from the Rangers to the Coyotes, the Blackhawks, Blue Jackets, Senators, and now, of course, the Sharks. And also, very naturally, the fact that he is a former Ranger meant that he, of course, had a goal and an assist against the Rangers when they played the Sharks a little bit earlier this season. But as far as what Duclair brings and why he could be a good fit, first thing that really jumps out is the speed. He can get up to apparently 23.32 miles per hour. That's per NHL Edge. And they also say that he is in the 96th percentile in the league this year. I don't think the Rangers really have like a terrible speed problem. I don't think they're necessarily like a painfully slow team, but they're also not exactly a fast team. I mean, who on the Rangers, which forward can really fly? I mean, Kreider's got great speed. I would have said Filipino, but obviously he's not coming back this season. Beyond that, I mean, Panarin's got good speed. Mika's got, pretty good speed. I don't know that anybody else really stands out. Lafreniere, his skating is better this season, and that's probably resulted in him being a faster skater. I think Trocheck's got some underrated speed as well. So, they got some guys that, again, have decent speed, but as far as like elite speed, it's Kreider, and that's basically about it. So adding another burner like an Anthony Duclair, I think that could help them. You play him on that top line, presumably with Kreider and Mika. Now you've got 2 wingers that can absolutely fly. That could be some fun. Maybe these guys start generating some more scoring chances off of the rush. Entirely possible. One thing about Duclair, he's not necessarily the most physical player. That's not going to make some fans happy. But again, in terms of just adding somebody else that can score, which I think the Rangers could use, I do think Duclair definitely makes some sense. The other thing that's a little bit of a question mark is Duclair's playoff track record. Now, he hasn't played a ton of Stanley Cup playoff games, only 34 to be exact. But in those 34 games, only 14 points for Duclair. Although, worth pointing out, last year's run with the Panthers, by far his best. 20 games for Duclair, 4 goals and 7 assists. So somebody that, kind of scored at a reasonable clip and something that's somewhat on par with his career regular season scoring rate. Again, it's a small sample size. We're only talking 34 games. Not a like miniature sample size, but he's not one of those guys that's played in like 100 playoff games and has like 25 points. He's done a little bit better than that. And like I said, good run with the Panthers last year and obviously contributing to them going on the run that they went on until they, met Vegas in the finals and couldn't pull that one off. But good run for Duclair, good run for the Panthers last year. And obviously he contributed to that. As far as what it would cost for Duclair, this is where it really gets interesting for me because Duclair's numbers this year are not very good. Not really at all. Of course, part of that, a product of playing with these Sharks, who are the worst team in the league right now, at least if you go by record. But 46 games for Duclair with the Sharks, just 9 goals and 8 assists. He's also got a career worst plus minus of -12. Again, with that stat, it's the Sharks. So that pretty much goes without saying. You're not going to have a very good plus minus playing on that team this year. The good news here, though, is it's kind of a buy low opportunity, right? And we talked about the idea of trading Capo Caco in a recent episode. I wasn't really feeling it. And part of the reason for that is it's kind of a buy low situation for whichever team acquires him. And it's kind of the same thing for Duclair here. The only difference is that the Rangers will be the team potentially acquiring him. So, again, it's kind of a seller's market, but Duclair, I mean, does like a second round draft pick get it done? A second and a fourth, maybe like a second and a mid-level prospect. Certainly, you're not going to include Othman or Perot, I would not think, two of the Ranger top prospects. And, again, there's going to be people that Duclair, really, you're just kind of underwhelmed by that idea. You want the Rangers to aim a little bit bigger. I get that. But keep in mind, again, the buy low window is open. And keep in mind the fact that when he was actually on a good team, the Florida Panthers, just 2 years ago, this guy in 74 games with the Panthers had 31 goals and 27 assists. Now, that is by far the best season of his career. So it's fair to also wonder, like, could he do that again? Maybe, maybe not. But clearly, this is somebody that if you put him in a good environment on a good team, and the Panthers 2 years ago won the President's Trophy, clearly this is somebody that is able to produce offensively. And maybe, just going, and we've talked about this with some other, trade candidates as well, but just going from such a bad team on the Sharks to, going to a bona fide cup contender like the Rangers. I know they haven't played well recently, but the bottom line is they're going to be in the playoffs. They are still in first place of a Metro division that we all thought was very difficult coming into the season. So I think that kind of breathes new life into somebody as well. Just kind of gets them going a little bit. Duclair got to the finals last year and lost. We'd love to get back. So again, if you're looking to add somebody to this team and not give up an arm and a leg, not give up a top prospect, not give up anybody significant off the current roster, possibly not even have to give up a first-round draft pick, then Anthony Duclair could be your guy. He could make some sense for the Rangers. And, if they go out and try to pick him up, then, I'm on board with it. It depends on how much the Rangers would have to give up, of course. And there might be a couple other guys I have in front of Duclair, but the idea of trading for Duclair, not against that at all. So going to keep everything rolling. We've got one more former Ranger to discuss. He was only here for a very short time, just a couple of years ago, but somebody that became a crowd favorite in a very short amount of time, and somebody that I think a lot of Ranger fans would like the team to look into as the trade deadline approaches. And we're going to talk about that very player in just a second. All right, let's go ahead. Keep everything rolling here. And that player, that mystery player that I was just talking about a second ago there, that would, of course, be Frank Vatrano. 2 years ago, Drury acquires him. He kind of did the same thing with Vatrano that he did with Tarasenko, because when they picked up Vatrano, it wasn't really like super close to the trade deadline. He was the first of all the players that they went on to acquire that season. And of course, Vatrano was only here for half a year, but I think Ranger fans really liked him. They liked his energy. They liked the feistiness, the grittiness to go along with just a booming slap shot and somebody that will not hesitate to shoot the puck. And of course, Vatrano was a big part of that fun, awesome run that the Rangers had to the Eastern Conference Final. Really did a nice job while he was here. Vatrano now 29 years old. And like Duclair, he can play either wing. But again, the smart money, of course, is on him playing right wing if he was to come back to the Rangers. That's where they had him 2 years ago. And as we mentioned, some things never change. Right wing still something of an issue for this team. I do have a spoiler for everybody, though. Frank Vatrano is going to cost more this time than he did last time. Of course, last time, all it took for the Rangers to pick this guy up was a fourth-round draft pick. They sent a fourth-rounder to Florida. They got Frank Vatrano in return. Part of the reason for that, again, the Panthers, I believe, were having some issues with their salary cap. I want to say there was a situation where, somebody was going to come off of LTIR and they had to move a player. Rangers pounced. They bring in Frank Vatrano. That was weird, too, because the Panthers were having an awesome season. So you would think they would not subtract from their NHL roster, but that's exactly what they did, and the Rangers got him for next to nothing, really. As far as what Vatrano's doing this year, he's on the Ducks, and 22 goals and 14 assists in 50 games. He's also a minus 13, having, possibly the best season of his career, and doing so on a team that really isn't going anywhere this season, so I think that just makes it all the more impressive. As far as what Vatrano would cost, I mean, again, it's tough to figure this stuff out. I didn't think that like Tanner Jeannot a couple of years ago was going to cost like a big prospect and like 12 draft picks or whatever that ended up being. Elias Lindholm, I figured he'd get a good haul to the Flames, but that ended up being quite a bit. Hard to figure this stuff out for sure. And do the Rangers, a couple of you guys have suggested this as well, do they go to the Ducks with an offer, not just for Vatrano, but do they try to get Vatrano and also Adam Henrique all in one fell swoop? That's a road that the Rangers could look to go down. Even if they don't, though, if it's just Frank Vatrano, maybe a second round pick and a fourth or fifth round pick, a mid-level prospect somewhere in that ballpark, could that get it done? Or would the Rangers, when you consider the fact that Vatrano has a year and a half left on his deal, he's not a pure rental, and we're talking more about that aspect of this potential trade in just a second, but would that cause his cost to increase because the Ducks can kind of say like, hey, whoever trades for this guy, you've got him for a year and a half. And that's another thing too, that the Ducks don't have to force a trade of Vatrano. If they don't have anything that they like all that much, then maybe they hang on to him to next deadline, although his value may not be as high then because Vatrano's obviously having probably the best year of his career. So again, it's hard to figure out what the return could be for a Frank Vatrano. The seller's market, again, that does scare me a little bit. And I got to believe with there not being a ton of bona fide stars available at this year's trade deadline, the price for all these guys is probably going to go up a little bit. And again, you got Vatrano having a career season. Obviously, this guy can really snipe. If there are teams out there looking to add a player like that, then they might be willing to pony up the dough for a player like Frank Vatrano. Very, very difficult to gauge this thing year in and year out, really, at the trade deadline. But again, something I mentioned a second ago that I want to elaborate on more now is that Vatrano is not necessarily, he's not a pure rental because he's in year 2 of a 3-year contract. It pays him $3 million per season. And that means whichever team picks him up, they could hang on to him for another year next year. Now, the Rangers, the last couple of years here, they've been in the market for pure rentals exclusively. Every player the Rangers picked up last year was in the last year of his contract. Same thing for the year before that. And every single player ended up leaving in free agency the following offseason. So, and you can see why the Rangers do that because obviously cap space is tight and they just don't feel like they can hang on to these guys long term. With Vatrano, it's a little bit different though because he is only making $3 million per year. And we do know that the salary cap looks like it's going to go up next year more than it has in recent seasons. Now, I don't know what that means. Does that mean it's going to go up 1.5 million instead of 1 million? Will it go up like 7 million? And again, I do feel for these GMs trying to figure all this stuff out when they don't even know what the salary cap is going to be next season. But, Frank Vatrano for $3 million a pop for just one more year after this one, that's probably manageable for the Rangers. I mean, you might have to trade one contract or another. There could be a Goodrow buyout in the offseason. That can save you some money that way as well. There's a lot of different ways it could go. And honestly, I mean, if the salary cap is that much of an issue, you could trade for Frank Vatrano and then trade him away in the offseason. I wouldn't necessarily want them to do that. But if that's the way it has to be and that's the only way the Rangers can get under the cap, then so be it. I mean, I'd rather have him for half a season than, not at all if the Rangers can get him for a reasonable price. So, and the other aspect too, you could always have the Ducks see if they can retain some of Vatrano's salary. Once again, if they do that, they'll probably ask for a little bit more in return for him, but that's a road you could go down as well. I mean, if they retain half of Vatrano's salary, then Vatrano only has a $1.5 million cap hit for the Rangers. Don't tell me you can't make that work. There's got to be a way that the Rangers can make that work going into next season. But they got some options. And again, one of the few players that is not a pure rental that I think does make some sense for the Rangers. But beyond all this, the numbers and everything and what he brings to the rink, true shooter's mentality, bona fide sniper. We saw that the first time around. I was really impressed by the fact that Frank Vatrano came onto this pass-happy Ranger team. He joins the team in the middle of the season and shows no hesitation when it comes to shooting the puck. He was not afraid to do it, even on a new team and even on a team that, had everything working. They were storming their way toward the playoffs and looking to go on a deep run. He didn't care. I mean, that's not the right verbiage, but he came over and decided that he was still going to be who he was. And that's a shoot first kind of a guy. And I think the Rangers kind of lack that right now, at least to a certain extent. And Frank Vatrano clearly gives them, something in that department because this guy will not hesitate to shoot the puck. Got a just hell of a slap shot. That one-timer is a thing of beauty. And yeah, just has a scorer's mentality. On top of that, another guy with big-time speed. This goes right back to what I was talking about with Anthony Duclair. Rangers, again, I don't consider them like a painfully slow team, but I don't think they're a fast team either. And they probably could use a little bit of a boost in that area of the game. Frank Vatrano can give you that. Also, not just offensively either. This guy flies back on the back check. He did that quite often when he was a Ranger the first time. And this one, again, this applies to everybody else on this list, but he is a right winger. Rangers are thin there. He also, he brings a certain intensity, a certain fire to the rink as well. Tends to mix it up, tends to chat a little bit, just a feisty player, one of those guys that I wouldn't necessarily say that he goes looking for trouble, but trouble tends to kind of find him a little bit, and he doesn't back away from it. It was not uncommon to see him, in the crease, just in the middle of all these dust ups in the playoffs for the Rangers last year. And of course, familiarity. We mentioned this with Vladimir Tarasenko. Tarasenko was here last year. Frank Vatrano just 2 years ago. Most of the Ranger team, or at least the key guys, are still intact from that run. Him and Jacob Trouba are really good friends from back in the day. And, obviously, I think that he really fit in well from a culture perspective the first time he was here. And I get the feeling that the Rangers would probably welcome him back with open arms, the players in that locker room. And I got to say, saying all this stuff out loud, Frank Vatrano is right up there at or near the very top of my list. It depends whether you want a center or right winger. I still think center is probably the biggest need. As far as wingers go and as far as former Rangers go, I think Frank Vatrano is my guy. I would love to see them, if they can make it happen, swing a deal, bring him back, and possibly be here not just for the stretch run this year, but all of next season as well. And at that point, he becomes a free agent after next year. I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but if you do bring him back and he's a free agent after next year, then you can cross that bridge when you get to it. He'll still only be about 30 years old when that happens. So, who knows? Maybe they do an extension with Vatrano at that time. Maybe he's a cap casualty and he's on his way in free agency. But like I said, a lot has to happen before we get to that point. The last thing I want to do here today was wrap up this episode with a couple of other Rangers that people are talking about, but I just don't see it happening. As far as there's three of them I have written down here. Three guys that certain Ranger fans are discussing, but I just don't think there's any way the Rangers will trade and bring these players back this season. The first one is Ryan Strome, and this one to me seems like it's all kind of fan created. I haven't seen any reputable NHL journalists float this out yet, but there's a bunch of memes going around. People are having fun with it on social media. I think some of them might be doing this kind of tongue in cheek. I liked Strome when he was here. Thought he did a nice job. Impeccable chemistry with Artemi Panarin, but he's not coming back. Ryan Strome has 3 more years left on his deal after this one at $5 million per season. And, I know he's on the Ducks. It's not a great team, but he's basically been a half-point per game player since he's gone there. I just don't see that happening. And the biggest thing that Ryan Strome brought to the Rangers was, once again, that chemistry that he had with Artemi Panarin. He's not really needed in that role anymore because the Rangers have Vincent Trocheck, and the two of them have really figured it out. And the two of them, arguably, Panarin and Trocheck, each having the best season of their respective careers. Now, if you want to get fancy, I guess you could put Strome on the right wing. He can play right wing, but then you're going to move Lafreniere away from Panarin. I don't think anybody really wants to do that. So, no, Ryan Strome not coming back to the Rangers. Liked him while he was here, but that's just not going to be happening. Another one that everybody's going to throw out, that there have been a couple of people mentioning this, and some of them probably tongue-in-cheek, but, got to trade for Tyler Mott for the 3rd straight year. That's not going to happen either. Tyler Mott is on the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Tampa Bay is a contending team, and you have to figure that they fully intend to be buyers at the trade deadline. I mean, I don't know why the Lightning would really sell off anybody. So, we'll see how that goes. I know that people like Tyler Mott. He was kind of a crowd favorite while he was here too, but can't see him coming back either. At least not at the deadline this year. Hey, he's a free agent in the offseason, so never say never. But I don't think the Lightning are going to trade Tyler Mott back to the Rangers. And the last one, I know I'm going to break some hearts here, but Matt Zuccarello. So if Zuccarello had not signed that 2-year extension with the Wild this offseason, then that would mean that he's in the last year of his contract with the Wild. If that was the case, I'd say, yeah, there's a possibility that actually could happen because he'd be a pure rental. And obviously somebody that's kind of resurrected his career the last few years with the Minnesota Wild. Good player, obviously a beloved player while he was here with the Rangers. But the fact that he added that 2-year extension, and I got to go ahead and look up Matt Zuccarello's age because I don't know it offhand. I want to say he's I don't know, it's 35-ish at this point for Zuccarello. Let's check this out together here real quick. Where's Zuki? Okay, he's 36. So yeah, he'll play out this year. He'll be 37 next year. He'll be 38 the year after that. I don't know if the Rangers are going to look to bring Zuccarello back at that age, at that price tag, because he's making $6 million this year, and then he'll be making $4.125 million in each of the next 2 seasons. Again, Had he not signed that extension, maybe the Rangers could work a deal with the Wild, especially if the Wild retain 50% of his salary. You get him back at just a $3 million cap hit for half a season. But the fact that he signed that extension, I just don't know that that's financially possible for the Rangers. I mean, I guess never say never. And of these three players that I just mentioned, the guys that I don't expect the Rangers to trade for, probably a better chance that they would go out and get him than either of the other two, Strome or Mott. But yeah, I don't see that happening. Sorry for all the Zuccarello fans out there. I mean, I'm a big Zuccarello fan myself, and all the best to him in Minnesota, but can't picture a reunion given the price tag that Zuccarello currently holds and also his age. But figure we can call it there. Once again, if you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, it is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well at LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is at LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. See you next time.